Hey, welcome once again. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure I do is that every single time I do a live or a podcast or an interview or anything like that, is that there are some points that you can implement. Now, I was going through questions that have been asked on social media, questions that have been asked at events when I've spoken, and questions that have been asked just generally by clients, the more common questions. And probably the number one question I have, and one of the big things that I help pretty much every client when they come to me, is sleep. And especially waking up through the night to go to the toilet. Now, many people think that waking up through the night to go to the toilet is normal because so many people do it. And people put it down to when people get older, they have a weaker bladder and so on, and prostate issues and all these different things. But it's a sign that the body's under excess amounts of stress in one way or another. And we have to look at where that stress is actually coming from. Is it physical stress, or is it mental, psychological stress? Now, with physical stress, is it that we're putting on more pressure to our body than we actually need to? Are we training too much? Is it working too much? Is it the food we're eating? Is it the drinks that we're having? Is it the mold exposure, the toxin exposure, the things within our environment? All these different things that are physical stresses on the body. Then we look at the emotional, the psychological stresses, the relationships we're in, the thoughts that we're having and the perceptions of these, the stress that we see from articles and news, things that are in the media. All these different things are stresses on the body, and they soon add up, impacting our focus and especially impacting our sleep. Now, many times people do struggle to switch off. We have another question talking about how do I actually get to sleep? This one I want to focus directly on how we actually stay asleep when we get there. Because out of the three things I see a lot of people having, apart from when people have them all, these three things of not being able to get to sleep, not able to stay asleep, and waking up feeling really groggy, like you need another 3-4 hours of sleep, they're the most common things. And out of those, waking up during the night is the most common when it comes to high achieving entrepreneurs that I work with. And I see many people actually waking up 4, 5, 6 times during the night, literally on the hour, every hour. But how do we stop that? Well, tip number one is to make sure we don't have any screen time within the last hour, ideally 2 hours before bed. And in that as well, we don't have bright light exposure. Why is this? Well, screens, I'm pretty certain if you've done any research into this, because you're frustrated with sleep, screens emit something called blue light. Now, blue light is actually our brain, when our brain sees this, it's actually thinking that it's the sunlight. So it thinks it's daytime. As the sun goes down, our body works on this circadian rhythm, its body clock. So when that sun goes down, we don't want to have light exposure and our body thinking it's the daytime. And what happens is the last few hours before bed, we start releasing a thing called melatonin, a hormone that helps us sleep. Now, one of the things that is linked with stress is a stress hormone called cortisol. This starts going down in the afternoon and the evening. And it is directly or invertedly linked with melatonin. So when cortisol is high, melatonin will be low. And vice versa, when melatonin is high, cortisol will be low. When we have exposure to light and this blue light exposure, especially on screens when there's usually something else stressful or we're scrolling through and we have much more awareness of this screen, we're kind of hypnotized by it. This blue light goes into our eyes and it signals to our brain that it's the daylight and we need to release cortisol, which actually blunts that melatonin release. So we need another 4, 5, 6 hours to get that melatonin back up. Now, one of the things you can do is always have lamps with more like reddish tin or orangey hue that are actually on the actual lamps rather than overhead bright lights. That is an amazing thing that you can do. Things like wearing blue light blocking glasses and switching to orange or red lenses later in the evening absolutely makes a lot of difference. Now, I am someone that I do watch some TV in the evening, and I always make sure I wear blue light blocking glasses when I do. If I don't, I notice a massive, massive difference. Now, the last hour, I'll switch off and I go to bed and start reading a non-fiction book, a fiction book, getting it the right way around. And from there, my brain starts switching off and I start to feel quite tired quite quickly. And it allows me to go to sleep. So no screen time within the last hour, ideally 2, and no bright lights within the last 2 or 3 hours as well. Number 2, no main meal within 2 hours of bed. And definitely no caffeine within the last 6 hours of your day. Caffeine is a stimulant, we know this. And that goes with decaf coffee as well. They have stimulants in them, which will keep our brain going. And it has a half-life of 5, 6, even up to 12 hours if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine. So that means that half of that caffeine is still in your system 6 to 12 hours later, which is quite worrying when we look at we want to then get to sleep. So if we're then trying to sleep and we're constantly stimulated, that stimulation potentially causing stress and releasing cortisol in the body, we don't want that. The same goes for big meals. If we have a big meal just before we go to sleep, the body isn't going to be focusing on switching off, detoxifying, and getting our body to actual sleep process. It's going to be focusing on digesting that food. Blood will be in the digestive system to churn that food and enzymes breaking that food down. We don't want that. So have your last meal 3 hours before bed, 2 hours before bed. Experiment. Some people I know will have it 4 or 5 hours before bed. I know this isn't possible for a lot of people. But experiment to see what works best for you and have a gap. Now, number 3, the third tip here, which sounds contradictory to number 2, is to have a protein snack just before bed and have protein consistently throughout the day. Not as in eat like a bodybuilder, where small meals often or anything like that. But if you're waking through the night, this is usually linked to blood glucose management. And what I see when I evaluate people's food diaries is that we're not getting very much protein in when we start. Protein is something which helps your body recover, helps cells rejuvenate, and it also helps balance our blood glucose levels. If we're having just carbohydrate meals, high levels of sugar, we are sending our body on a roller coaster of up and down glucose management. Now, when we get to bed and we need to have glucose to fuel the brain, if our body is going up and down with glucose throughout the day rather than steady, we're going to see these dips. Now, our brain needs glucose to fuel. All our organs need glucose to fuel. But the organs can store glucose. The brain cannot. It needs a consistent supply of glucose in order to keep functioning. And it's very active when we're asleep, with making sure everything is working within the body. Now, when we have this dip, we then get a spike in cortisol, which is usually the thing that wakes you up, because cortisol's prime job is to boost blood glucose to make sure the brain doesn't get low. And when glucose gets low, we spike this cortisol up. It's exactly the same thing that happens first thing in the morning to wake us up. Therefore, we're usually going through a detoxification process, and our body gets woken up and broken through that process. We end up needing to go to the toilet. But if you have protein throughout the day, nice consistent amounts, you're going to be able to help stabilize your blood glucose levels. Then, just before you go to bed, have a protein snack. It might be a couple of slices of good quality ham, a few nuts, or maybe like a small amount of protein shake. Don't have too much water then. Again, it could be like you're drinking too much, but most of the time it's because we are overly stressed. We have too much screen time before bed, too much bright light exposure. We eat too close to bed. That's not even going into alcohol or anything like that. We eat too much close to bed, the wrong composition of meals with low protein, and don't spread that protein throughout the day. So implement these 3 things, and I'm pretty certain you will notice an improvement in sleep. Just by adding that protein snack in, see if that wake up time gets a little bit further into the morning. and then start experimenting once again with the meal times and so on. Is it going to be a game changer to completely do it every single night? Maybe not. We have to look a little bit deeper, but these things will absolutely help you. Now, do you need extra help with this? If so, you can check out my Brain Fog Blitz course, 21-day Brain Fog Blitz. Now, it says brain fog. There's a lot in there with morning routine and evening routine, how to sleep and how to optimize your nutrition. No doubt, if you're struggling with sleep, you're then going to be struggling with things like brain fog, concentration, energy dips as well. Go to www.ojayhealth.com/brain fog blitz if you want to go and sign up to that course now. Alternatively, I have a free presentation called Is This Burnout? If you go to ojhealth.com/burnout, you can get that presentation completely free. Just pop in your details and you'll have access to it. Need one-to-one help? Drop me a message and we can talk further. Hopefully this has been a